Ho Chi Minh was not a patriot who fought the French colonialism to liberate Vietnam, because by the early 1947, when he declared national resistance against French colonialism, France was no longer a colonist country. France had become a republic in 1945, and the French Department of Colony had been dismantled. Instead, Ho Chi Minh was an international communist whose origin was uncleared. He sneaked into Vietnam in 1941 from China, bringing with him Chinese Communist flag. Yes, the yellow star on blood-red background is Chinese Communist flag. He launched the communist-styled August Revolution across Vietnam and seized the Vietnamese government in Hanoi in 1945. No one voted for him or for his bloodthirsty Communist Party ever since. Contrary to communist propaganda, it was Ho Chi Minh who colluded with the French from 1945 to 1947, when he tried to solicit for French recognition as the head of a territorial provincial government of Indochina of France, against the will of the people of Vietnam and of the Nguyen's dynasty for total independence. Ho Chi Minh even illegitimately invited the French Expeditionary Army to North Vietnam and collaborated with them to kill Vietnamese people who resisted the French territorial ambition. The war against France for independence only happened from 1945 to 1947, and it was not led by Ho Chi Minh but by the Vietnamese patriots from all over Vietnam against the French Expeditionary Army and against Communist Ho Chi Minh militia, the Viet Minh, who betrayed Vietnam. It ended in 1947 when France accepted the request of the United States and returned full independence of Vietnam to the Nguyen's dynasty. Within 2 years of his reign, Ho Chi Minh and his gangs killed more Vietnamese people than the French colonists killed all Vietnamese in 100 years of domination. That was why King Bao Dai accepted the power as the head of the state of Vietnam when France accepted the demand for independence for Vietnam. He must rescue his people from the bloodthirsty communist Ho Chi Minh. The independence of Vietnam granted by France to King Bao Dai was a real independence recognized by the world, not a fake nor a semi-independence. King Bao Dai never agreed to be a lackey of France, and he did not accept any compromise except total independence. The reason why the French Expeditionary Force remained in Vietnam after signing the Independence Treaty was because Vietnam at that time did not have a regular army after the colonial period. So it took time to establish an army with the help of France, because the two countries had become allies. Both the government and the army were gradually transferred by France authority, and the French army helped protect Vietnam during that time. The True Vietnam War was the war against international communist expansion in Indochina by the French-Vietnamese ally, and it was prelude in 1953 when Chinese communists disguised as Vietnamese, served by the Vietnamese communists, the Viet Minh, invaded North Vietnam and attacked the Allies' garrisons at Dien Bien Phu Valley. That was the first battle in which international communists came from China to seize Vietnam. The army that actively attacked Dien Bien Phu was Chinese communists, not the Viet Minh. In fact, the Viet Minh were just mercenaries for the Chinese communists and were only used as sacrificial pawns for the Chinese communists' human wave tactics. To deceive everybody, communists falsely venerated Vong Nguyen Giap, a Vietnamese with Chinese communist military cadet background, as though he was a talented Vietnamese general, master of Dien Bien Phu. But the truth is that he was just a lackey who served as a sycophant for the Chinese generals when they invaded Dien Bien Phu. Without any real power and any achievements other than obeying the Chinese communists' orders to force Viet Minh soldiers to drag Chinese communists' artillery up the mountain like cattle and horses, and died like sacrificial pawns for communist China. The defeat of the French-Vietnamese ally at Dien Bien Phu was inevitable because Communist China army was 100 times larger and stronger than the French Republic and the nation of Vietnam combined. Therefore, the United States had to establish the SEATO bloc to deal with Communist China expansionism and to protect the rest of Vietnam against the invasion of the Communist bloc in Asia. That is, the so-called Vietnam War was an international war against communist expansion in Asia, in which Vietnam was the second victim country after Korea, and it started in 1954. It was not the war for independence of Vietnam against French colonialism and American imperialism bullshit as the communist propaganda lied and the stupid people believed. President Ngo Dinh Diem was not the American Mandarin as communist propaganda heralded. In fact, he was a Mandarin of the Nguyen's dynasty of Vietnam, and later the Prime Minister of King Bao Dai, who assigned him for the task of preparing South Vietnam for the new situation. President Ngo Dinh Diem never oppressed Buddhism, as evidenced by the fact that King Bao Dai, a Buddhist, never blamed President Diem for oppressing Buddhism. In the time of his presidency, President Ngo Dinh Diem's government and the army had more Buddhist leaders than Catholics. All the bad things about him were smears concocted by the American Communists and the Vietcong. The shave-header monks who attacked him were set up by the Vietcong to sabotage the national government of the Republic of Vietnam, not true Buddhist monks. If you believe that the US harmed President Diem because it wanted to send troops to Vietnam, you are completely stupid, because it is nonsense communist propaganda and it is insulting to the US, the only country that helps Vietnam and the world from communism. The truth is that there was no conflict in strategy and tactics between the US government, that was during President Kennedy's time, and the government of the Republic of Vietnam. If anyone has evidence to the contrary, please bring it out, and if you have it, just shoot me or bet as much money as you want. I am ready to follow. First, the US helped South Vietnam through the SEATO bloc because South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos were protected by the SEATO bloc, meaning that the US had the right to send troops to Vietnam at any time along with 6 allied countries, and the Republic of Vietnam did not need to object because it had agreed, and, because only of the necessary need, the Allies would come to Vietnam. Second, because North Vietnam communists were in disguise to invade South Vietnam, the US could not officially intervene, therefore the war was unofficial. And the American Congress could not bring it to the United Nations to formalize the Vietnam War like it did in Korea. So the US Congress gave the duty to run the Vietnam War to the executive branch, that is, to the US presidents, and agreed to aid the Republic of Vietnam militarily to have the strength to fight against the guerrilla war that the North Vietnamese communists had infiltrated along with the underground troops attacking in the South. Kennedy was not stupid enough to want to send troops to Vietnam when the crazy dogs from the North had not yet invaded. The truth is that Kennedy was very happy because President Diem was so good at fighting the guerrilla war that the US reduced the number of Marines protecting the advisors to only a few hundred, and the Republic of Vietnam was able to take on the responsibility of protecting the American advisors. This meant that he could brag to the US Congress and the American people to reassure them that their children would not have to go to Vietnam to sacrifice themselves, and thanks to that he could win a second term as president. No president would want to send troops to Vietnam when it was not necessary. Only a madman would believe such nonsense propaganda. Also, communists spread propaganda that American weapon industrial moguls wanted the war so that they could sell weapons. But to who? The only buyers was the US government, but there is no evidence that the moguls control the US Congress and President Kennedy at that time. President Diem did not have a family rule. He himself founded the Republic of Vietnam under a democratic system with proper elections and clear laws. How could there be a family rule? Remember, the president has the right to appoint the cabinet, and he has the right to bring in people from his own faction. At the same time, the advisory position for family member is a right. Saying that Mr. Diem had a family rule, when Kennedy also did the same, is just a dirty smear and slander propagated by the communists. Also, When a democratic government of a country is at war with other country, Vietnam War is not a civil war. The president is entitled to more power at wartime. It is legal and necessary.